Bookseller Crow. Almost live.
Thank you all for coming out tonight on a Saturday. We don't normally do events on a Saturday, but we thought we'd make an exception for Peter, who has come all the way from Massachusetts after all. We did a Zoom interview last year, and so it's a real pleasure to have him in the shop this evening. This is your eighth
book.
Eighth novel.
Very confusing because it is called 9.
That's right. Yeah, eighth novel. That's right. I guess most of you are pretty familiar with Peter's other books, so they don't necessarily need an introduction. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah. I think this is my stab, pun intended, at the genre of the 10 strangers who are brought together, don't know why, and begin to get killed off one by one. So this comes from And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which is a book I probably read when I was about 10. I liked all her books, but that one just absolutely haunted me, and was just mesmerizing, this idea of these strangers on this island unable to escape, and then everything about it, the little figurines disappearing. So I'd always wanted to do my version of this type of story, and I think I was always hung up by where to put it, because if you put it on an island, it's been done. If you put it in a snowbound hotel, that's been done. And suddenly one day I had this sort of idea that, well, maybe they don't need to be in a place, maybe they just need to be identified as such. So I came up with this idea of a letter that 9 strangers would receive. They're all across the United States. And the letter contains a list, 9 names on it, including theirs, nothing else. And then one by one, those people on that list begin getting killed. So in a sense, they're all put on an island, and the island is, the death island here, where they're awaiting their fate. And I love these stories, in part because there's several mysteries at play. One is obviously always who's doing it and why are they doing it. But I also enjoy the mystery of who's going to go next in the list, and we never quite know. So it was really fun to write. I hope it's a different version on this type of story, but it is my homage for sure to And Then There Were None.
I was going to ask you about that word, homage. Are you obviously fairly comfortable with that?
Yeah, it's just it's the polite way to say it, that you didn't rip someone off. I was talking about this other night, but the book references And Then There Were None quite a few times. So I think in an earlier book I wrote, which was The Kind Worth Killing, 2 strangers meet on a plane and wind up discussing a murder, which, it sounds awfully familiar to strangers on a train, in which case 2 strangers. So early on in the book I have when the couple, they actually initially meet in the airport bar, and Lily, the woman character, has a Patricia Highsmith novel on the bar in front of her, and I think if you do that, then it makes it look like it's an homage instead of just pure plagiarism. So that's a little trick for you.
Was it an idea that came to you fairly fully formed?
Once I got the idea of the letter, no, it didn't come. Once the letter, I stuck with that. And then I had to come up with a reason. A reason for these murders to be occurring, and that took a while to sort of think about who might be doing this and why. And then after that, it's a matter of thinking of who's on this list and what are they like. And they do have a slight connection, so that's I had to think about that. And then when I started to write it, I really wanted to write it as a novella. I wanted to write sort of a half-size novel. In fact, I did that. I did a quite quick version where people get bumped off quite fast. It all happens swiftly, and I sent it to my agent, and kind of not sure if he'd even know what to do with it. I mean, it's a novella and it's a bit of an odd story. And he said he liked it enough that he saw that I could double it in length. And he had some suggestions on how to do that and make a novel out of it. So then I went back in, which is hard to do, actually, to sort of, I had everything there, but I just needed to keep some people alive longer, I think was essentially the key to getting the length up. But I added some characters. I added a sort of detective figure and some other characters, and eventually hit novel length. So it was not it was a process. I think I started it, I think it was like 2 years. It kind of got delayed there in the middle. It wasn't usually I write a draft in about 3 months, but this one I think I started it, and 2 years later I actually finished the novel length version of it.
And when you're dealing with obviously a very famous novel as your kind of source material, for want of a better word, do you not get nervous?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. I mean, I think when I was quite a bit younger, I found myself, when I would sit down and try and write a book and fail, which I did quite a bit, that often the book that I was writing was really similar to whatever book I was most recently obsessed with. And then I think over time I just did enough writing and reading that I feel like my own voice sort of came out of that. And this book is actually quite different than there were none. There's not sort of similar characters or similar murders even. But again, like, I wasn't nervous because I was, mentioning Agatha Christie throughout the book. Hence the homage. So it was, I protected myself that way.
Do you ever think it's like a bit like being a jazz musician?
Like a riff on a theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I've never quite thought of myself as remotely a jazz musician, but I get the idea that, frankly, you could panic as a writer in the fact that so much has been done. All's been done. So generally the brilliant original idea you just came up with has probably been done in some form. So it's fine to do your own version of that, and just do it hopefully either better or different. And I think that's the key, is to not get overly worried about originality in that sense. Especially, in the genre I am in, which is murder mystery novels. There's just, think of how many come out in a year, how many TV shows in a night. How many fictional people are murdered constantly in our cultural imagination. It's amazing. So it's all been done. You just need to find your sort of twist on it or take on it.
Peter doesn't want to, but I've forced him to read a bit. So he's going to read a little bit.
I had to madly find a place to read. I should have been prepared for this, but
No.
I'll tell you about. So one of the nice things about this book was, and I've always loved this in old books that I've read, but it has a character list in the front, which that's the death list too. It's the 9 people. But I love that in a book. I love that, reading in Agatha Christie and you forget which colonel has been killed. And you can go back and look at it. So the opening part, which is actually called 9, really goes through all those 9 characters receiving a letter. And right toward the end of that part, someone receives a letter at the same time that they receive a nasty surprise. I'm not that far into the book, so I hope I'm not ruining it for anyone, and I don't believe I am. But there's one last character named Frank. He's out taking a walk in Maine, and he's spotted an envelope waiting for him. His does not arrive in the mail. And I'll read this little section here at the end, and it's quite short. Frank was about to turn to see if he could spot who'd left the envelope on the rock when he felt the tight grip of someone's hands around his ankles Then he was yanked violently, so that he pitched forward and landed face down on the damp sand. His head had partially struck the edge of his turnaround rock, and there were sudden tears in his eyes, a sharp wet pain on his temple. Whoever had attacked him hoisted him by his belt and moved him a foot forward along the sand so that his face landed in a shallow divot filled with seawater. He tried to get up, but his arms felt weak, and he yelled out for help instead. The person on his back pushed his face violently into the pool of water. Frank's nose stung with terrible pain, and his mouth filled with sand and water. "Do you know why you're going to die?" came a voice in his ear. Frank coughed, and now he could taste warm, salty blood mixed in with the sand clogging his mouth. "No," he said, although part of him did know why he was dying. It had to do with the jetty, didn't it? And the dreams he always had. The voice spoke again. He could feel breath moving over his skin, and the words that his murderer said made him realize that he had been right. His dreams had been right, too. And for a moment he felt something resembling peace, the real world mixing in with his dream world to make just one place, the world of his existence, rapidly coming to an end. The strong hands pressed his face deep into the sand, the water licking at his ears. In the red darkness he saw concentric circles, like tide pools growing and shrinking, and he saw his mother back in the old kitchen, wearing an apron over her dress. She was turned away from him, doing something at the stove, and he was crying, begging his case, telling her how sorry he was. "Sorry, Mommy, I'm sorry," but she wouldn't turn around. Even the darkness was now shrinking, until there was nothing but tide pools, and his mother still not turning back, the world getting smaller, breathing water instead of air. I realize now it was quite grim. It's not all that grim.
You just said earlier that you described the genre that you write in, but quite unusually as well for a crime writer in this day and age, you don't have a series character, or you've not attempted any kind of. Is that something that's not ever interested you?
I mean, I wouldn't mind doing a series character, but I'd have to find a series character, and I quite haven't found one. Some sort of, and tends to have to be a detective character, not necessarily, that I was so in love with that I would want to return to their story. And I think I was really lucky. I love the standalone. I think one of the brilliant things about a standalone is anything goes. You can kill off your detective character, you can kill off your main character, you can veer your story in any direction. There is something about the series, and I love a good series, but you do tend to know, for the most part, that it's going to play out in favor of the series character. So there is a familiarity to it, and that's possibly why we like them. But I do love the freedom of a standalone, and I love that you're creating a new world, even though I try and essentially create, a version of our contemporary world with each book. But you're world building with each book. You're kind of creating a new place. So I like that. I think it's curious. My first novel came out about a year after Gone Girl, and I think right around that time in the publishing industry, standalones were suddenly all the rage. And I think my editor actually said 5 years earlier, we would have told you to establish a series character in your second book, had this been. But right now, he's like, standalones are more popular. And at that point, I think some crime writers who were writing series stopped writing them for a while and did standalones. Because there's always these little trends within the crime genre.
Do you think that makes your books in some way more distinctive?
I hope so. I hope that as standalones, they do. You're able to sort of do things that are quite a bit different. I often think of my books as like this is this Before She Knew Him was quite a suburban book, so I thought of it as my Updike crime novel or something like that.
Okay.
And I thought for every value break, I was writing a quite vicious story in one person's perspective that gets weirder and weirder. And I thought of it as my Ira Levin book. So in a way, it was, and I read some of the, I reread Rosemary's Baby and Stepford Wives as inspiration. So I do try, I know that my voice always comes out, and this sort of same things I'm interested in tend to come out, which some people have pointed out to me, the things that show up in all of my books. But so there's, but that's how I think of them. That's fun because I think in a series, once you've created the mood of the series, for the most part, it stays the same. Maybe it doesn't have to. I mean, maybe that would be a really interesting series where it's like each adventure for the main character is like quite different.
I suppose the exception to that is Highsmith, isn't it? The Ripley books are kind of.
Well, I mean, she wrote a series where the main character is the killer. So I think, and that's actually so. I will talk a little bit about my next book, which is in a year, which is a semi-sequel to The Kindworth Killing, and brings back the character of Lily Kintner, who is a semi-villainous character in the Tom Ripley vein. And so I did want to return with her. I call it a semi-sequel because it's got a sort of a new plot that's driving it, and yet it contains these two characters from my previous book. So in theory, you don't need to have read my previous book. So I mean, and maybe I would go back to Lily again, and eventually it would become the Lily Kintner series. But yeah, I mean, the fact that Highsmith kept returning to Tom Ripley, and what's amazing about him is not, he's not he's a murderer, of course, but he never wants to murder anyone. He just kind of has to. He keeps finding himself in this position where like really has one choice, and that's to murder this person to get out of it. And he's always a little reluctant about that, which is kind of amazing that happened. It's 5 books, I think so. That it just kept happening. But yeah, and I do love that series.
So have you finished the new one? Or
I have.
You have? Okay.
Yeah, and at least 2 people in this audience have read it.
Is it any good? I'm sure it is.
Let's hope.
Anybody want to ask a question?
I don't know if you've encountered them, but have you looked at Sophie Hanna's new Agatha Christie's? I just read one of them.
I did, I think she's written 3, has she?
Maybe 4, but yeah, that kind of.
I think I read the first 2, and they're very good. I mean, she's so steeped in Christie that she really gets the tone and the style right on, and it's amazing that she got asked to do that, because she's been the first, who got asked to. I was quite jealous. I don't think it's ever even remotely on the long list for that particular job, but people do get. I mean, there's always that weird thing where you ask someone to write the continuation of an author, but the first one in particular was really good, and she even got if I recall, Agatha Christie's quite fond of exclamation points, and she even got that down. So she really nailed the style, which is I think what you want to do. I mean, Anthony Horowitz does. Ian Fleming. I mean, he's a master at mimicking writers. So his Ian Fleming books are just read like Ian Fleming books, and his Sherlock Holmes, same thing. I mean, it's just he's got a good ear for that. It's almost it's like mimicry, I guess.
I meant to say to you actually when we did the Zoom interview, you've got a Hound of the Baskervilles poster behind you. We are in Sherlock Holmes country here, because Doyle lived down the road, and
I actually wrote a Sherlock. I got asked to write a Sherlock Holmes story. Martin Rosenstock is the editor, and I think they come out here. It's his second anthology of Sherlock Holmes stories. So this one, which is coming out in the fall, so a ways off. It's called Sherlock's Life. So the idea is he asked like 9 writers to write a Sherlock story, and then one would be, he all had us pick a time period. So you do one quite young, and then all the way up to a retirement story, or whatever. So I did that for the first time, and it was really hard. I mean, it's hard to get that tone right, and to stay. And his whole thing was, the editor's rules were, this was a canonical Sherlock Holmes story, so no, werewolves or nothing. There's so many. I mean, how many Sherlock Holmes stories have been written? I mean, you could fill the Grand Canyon, I think, with Sherlock Holmes stories. But they're often like, he's in space or moving through time or fighting Jack the Ripper and things like that. But this one was but it was fun. It was really fun to do. And yes, I did. Yeah, so all those Zoom interviews are so interesting. I think we all get used to seeing them too, or even newscasters. I don't know if your newscasters went home in this country, but ours did on my news show, which is the PBS NewsHour, and 2 of them had like animals that one had cats in the background moving around, and you just absolutely cannot pay attention to a news story if there's a cat like walking across behind. It could be the most tragic thing in the world. You're just thinking cat. So yeah, and when you do the Zoom interviews at home, you get a little look at.
Well, in fact, that's what happened when we did yours.
Was my cat back there?
Finty came and walked across your shoulder and settled down behind you.
Right, and you were just done. You were like, your mind went
exactly. Blank. Well, not least because you look like my cat.
Yes, I do remember that. And then I think we just talked cats for the rest of the time. Right. Because why else would you talk about anything else? Yes, Finty is often likes to be in my writing room.
Yeah, I was intrigued because you said you kind of write on the sofa.
I've changed that because of my back. Don't write on sofas. You'll be old before your time. Well, I've moved, actually. I've moved up I lived right outside of Boston. I've moved up the shore to a town called Gloucester in Massachusetts. And I got a proper desk chair. And now I try and do my writing on that. I did for a while, quite sort of lay on the couch and write there, but I think that's bad for you.
I thought that was a good gig.
It was. I loved it, but I'm looking out, and I don't want to be old before my time.
Anybody else have a question?
I was going to ask about 8 Perfect Murders, so I've just finished reading it, to the point that I used to miss my train pretty much every day because I got so engrossed in reading it. What was the rationale behind that? Because obviously there's similar elements to 9 Lives and things like that. Is it the number of things that you like, or what kind of prompted you to write 8 Perfect Murders?
Well, that has an interesting story behind it, and I do think it does feel like sort of back to back, not quite back to back, but those 2 novels sort of dug into crime history's past and kind of created a fresh story out of it. But 8 Perfect Murders, or Rules for Perfect Murders, as it's called here, such an outlier in all my ideas. And the way that I got it, I was out taking a walk in the afternoon, and sort of around a pond, and I was writing a short story at the time and trying to come up with a really clever idea for the murder. And so I was sort of going over in my head, what are really clever ideas from novels for murders? And I quickly had this thought, like, what if a blogger wrote down a list of the best fictional murders there are, say 10 of them. I mean, it initially started as 10. And then immediately had the thought, and what if someone else took that list and then started creating copycat crimes based off that list? And then I kept walking. I think it was about 45 minutes around the pond, and by the time I was done, it was like the whole book was just sitting there. I knew who wrote the list, I knew who the murderer was and why they were doing it. I knew the relationship between the two. I even knew about half of the books that I would want on the list. And that never happens with me. I mean, it's never a fast plot. It usually just creeps up on me over time. This was like, it just felt like it was right there, ready to be written, which is a good and a bad feeling. I mean, the good is you feel like you might have a book there. The bad is that you actually have to write it. From starting, you're kind of like, it's all in your head. But it's the only time it's ever happened like that, and it was also fun because when I just started off, I was thinking about these perfect murders and crime, and doing research on that. I don't like research, but I do like that. I like reading research for sure, and I'm trying to whittle down my list that this blogger would have written, and then build from there. So it was fun. So.
Did it interrupt something that you were already writing?
I don't think so. I can't entirely remember. I'm thinking no, because if I was thinking about a short story, and I do remember I tend to write. I tend to take a little time off between books, and write short stories, or if I'm honest, all short stories. Usually one. It's kind of like to clear my mind. Mm-hmm. But to keep writing. So if I was doing that, I was probably between books. I think it interrupted what I was thinking would be my next book, for sure. But it was sort of amazing that it was like so fully formed in my head an hour after I first thought of it, which was great.
And of course,
it'll never happen again.
Of course, it featured a bookseller.
And it did.
Yeah.
It did. Do you identify with me?
It was actually.
I didn't know you then.
No, I know. When I read it, I thought, he does know what he's talking about.
I was a bookseller for many years in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I had a little bit of history, experience.
Anybody else got a question?
Now you're 8, soon to be 9 books into the murder mystery genre. Have you ever thought about moving into other genres or other media, working in television or film?
I think in terms of other genres, I don't think I'll move out of this genre. Simply that my ideas all my ideas are murder mystery ideas. They always have been. I'm never just suddenly like struck with a great idea for a romantic comedy. And if I was, then maybe I would want to try my hand at it, but they don't come to my head.
Well, the last one didn't turn out too well.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the way my mind works. And in terms of film and television, I mean, there's been some options on a number of my books that are interesting to hear about. And occasionally, like, I'll have a phone conversation with like a producer or something, and it's entirely different world than writing books. And I've talked to a number of friends who are sort of moved from book writing into script writing or trying to sell your scripts, and I love movies, a huge passion for them. So a number of people who know me are like, you should write movies. It's very different. I mean, I think, let's say I was very lucky and wrote a film and then sold it. I mean, first of all, the chance of it being made are very slim, even though I might have sold it for some money. And the chance that it did get made, it would be entirely different from what I had handed in. It would change over time, other people would come in. So ultimately, even though I have editors who come in and make suggestions on my book is my book. And it comes out into the world, and it's not as shiny or glamorous as a movie, but it's an easier process than the movies. It is a different world, and I did go out briefly to LA, and I had a sort of surreal lunch with 2 film producers that were like, if you had written them in a book as film producers, you'd read it and say, these are just utter cliches. Just these, telling me I'm the hot new thing. I mean, I stole this from another writer I know, Paul Tremblay. I'll give you his name. He said, and I think he has a movie finally coming out. The book industry is no, 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 yes. And the film industry is yes, 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 no. Which I think is perfect because, talking to people in the publishing world who I love, they're always like, yeah, your book's coming out. We're so excited. Maybe we'll sell a few copies. No one's sort of, but, I went out there for one meeting about, before she knew him, start thinking of the sequel ideas. This is going to be so huge that, you're going to have to write a sequel. And then, you don't hear a thing. And it's just gone, I think. And that one's dead in the water. So it's sort of fun. It is a very different attitude. So it doesn't appeal to me. I mean, then again, what might appeal to me is actually writing an adaptation of someone else's, like a favorite mystery novel or something, could appeal to me out of any of those options.
And
Sorry?
And which one?
I'm trying to think. I feel like I read something quite recently that I thought was good. I mean, I would like to do there's a couple. John D. MacDonald, who's kind of a forgotten American mid-century guy who wrote some great standalone books. And I've heard, you always hear that someone's working on them. A really good Travis McGee story. I mean, one of my all-time favorite American crime novels is A Kiss Before Dying by Ira Levin, who I've already talked about. It was his debut book. It's brilliant. It's actually been turned into 2 movies. So it was turned into a movie in the 50s, I think with Robert Wagner as the young sociopath, and then it was turned into a movie in the 80s or 90s with Matt Dillon. Neither are very good. But there's a great movie somewhere in there. I mean, there's obviously a couple, huge ones. I mean, Secret History has never been turned into a movie. Isn't that amazing? I suspect Donna Tartt's keeping that from happening, which is her prerogative. But I know at some point it was optioned. I mean, obviously, if someone said, do you want to adapt The Secret History into a movie, I would stop everything else I'm doing and work on that. Because that would be appealing. So yeah, there's a few. For sure.
Anybody else with a question?
How about your books then? Who's your favourite character?
Well, the one I've returned to, Lily Kentner, who's, kind of came out of nowhere. It's not a spoiler to say that she features heavily in The Kind Worth Killing, and she is, you find this out very early in the book, she's killed people. She's a little bit like a Tom Ripley in the sense, she doesn't have bloodlust, she's not out to kill people, but she doesn't mind killing people, which I think is quite funny. I think she sees killing people as an easy thing to do, like swatting at a fly. So I think for her, she has just a sort of special kind of brain, and you might want to call it a psychopathic brain. But she sees herself as very part of this natural world, and she sort of sees the big picture that we're all just these brief blips on this earth, and we're all gonna die quite soon. So what's the big deal if some of us die a little sooner? If it makes the world a better place, it just doesn't bother her. So I quite like her attitude. And she was she was a lot of fun to write, and she's a mystery to me still in a way. So I did return to her. So she's my favorite, and I also quite like Malcolm from 8 Perfect Murders. Partly because while there are parts of him that are not remotely like me, we do share, for instance, a reading history. I think there's a section in the book where he gives quite a extensive reading history of how he became a reader early on, and the books he talks about are essentially the books that I fell in love with. So there's a little autobiographical element to him as well.
I'm trying to remember. I think I'm right in thinking Lily's first murder is in London, isn't it? Is that?
She does commit a murder in London.
Yeah.
It's not her first. It's her
Yes,
second.
of course. Yeah.
But yes, there's a little side story that involves her in London on a sort of a year abroad, quite popular thing for American students to do. It's one of my favorite murders, actually, the one that she actually commits.
Involving a pub.
Yeah, involving a pub and a chicken curry and a nut allergy. Yeah.
I should have asked you in the beginning, how nice is it to be travelling again? And I'm not asking you to say London's wonderful, but
No, I should have said this at the beginning too, which is, it feels great after 2 years to be out on the road, back to my favorite city of London, and in particular, I think here to a part of London that I've never been to. So we got here a little bit early, and I've just been walking around this neighborhood. It's beautiful. Crystal Palace, never been here, so I'm really excited to go someplace new, to be looking at readers face to face as opposed to through Zoom. Zoom's been great because it's allowed us to keep connections, but I'm tired of it. So this is really fun to see all of you. So amazing, yeah.
and this is, Crystal Palace has more than one name, because this is actually Upper Norwood.
Okay, I was misinformed.
No, I mean it is Crystal Palace, but
Yeah.
it's also Upper Norwood, or even Norwood Heights, which is the location of the Norwood Builder,
Okay.
the Sherlock Holmes story.
Yes, I don't remember the details, but I remember the title.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, it's great. Quite a distance in my cab down south of the river, but what an amazing little neighborhood.
Yeah, and we got dinosaurs as well.
You have dinosaurs and a view of the city,
Yeah.
although not tonight. It's too grey.
Anybody else with a question?
I've got a really important question and I'm quite anxious about it.
All right.
Will the cats in your books always be okay? You might not be able to answer that.
I will answer that.
I worry about them.
Yeah, they will be. It's quite interesting. And I have the same disease that, and I don't know if it's a disease, but it is an oddity, which is about killing animals in. Sorry, no, that's not true. There's one animal death. It's a death of an animal to save another animal. But in general, if I've introduced a quite sweet cat, I'm not going to have that cat nailed up to a door to prove the killer's point. It's often done, I think, in films. And it's funny because I too have this issue, which is you're reading a book with a bunch of human deaths in it, and you're actually quite gleefully enjoying it, and then the poor dog gets killed, and suddenly you're, plunged into depression, and you hurl the book out the window. So it's a funny trait of, animal lovers that we can't abide by that. And I learned that quite early, and I think you get that from other writers. It's just don't kill the animals in your book. I mean, you can do it, but you're just going to lose. I mean, you'll simply lose a number of readers who don't like that at all. But I am quite.
Goodreads will be.
Oh yeah. The word will go out. Your name will be mud. Well, thank you all very much for coming out on a cold night. It's a good group.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
They can find you a book for your girlfriend, your husband, your girl, or your boy. And if If you've got a need for an uplifting read, Justine and Jonathan can pick out a book you'll enjoy. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. Crystal Palace Hill, that is. But you can order online.